Let's now reflect on some of the history of the former National College of Agricultural Engineering, which more latterly became known as Silsoe College of Cranfield University. The founding fathers, the Institution of British Agricultural Engineers, as the IAGRE was then known, the Agricultural Engineers Association and the Agricultural Machinery and Tractor Dealers Association, lobbied government in the 50s for a centre of agricultural engineering to complement the work already at Silsoe with the Institute. In February 1959, the Minister of Education announced a new national college to provide a national centre for the agricultural engineering industry, which would also attract overseas students. In September 1962, the first cohort of 20 undergraduates began their studies at Boreham House near Chelmsford in Essex, because there were no buildings at Silsoe. The move to Silsoe was in 1963. In 1964, the first 15 postgraduates joined the team at Silsoe. They originated from 9 different countries. Here you can see Peter Payne, who by then was the first principal, and some of the construction of the early part of the campus. So what did the NCAE at Silsoe do for the world, and how did it complement and work alongside the Institute? One of the major contributions really was to help to redefine agricultural engineering in the UK and, as a result, much of the rest of the world. Originally, agricultural engineering was almost always looked at as a tractor and machinery activity. Whilst that was very important in the machine design and mechanisation, there was a lot of work in field engineering, from irrigation and drainage, soil erosion and conservation work, farm buildings and structures. And the splitting of the discipline into those 3 formats helped each one to develop, but it was essential that there was lots of cross-disciplinary work. They all moved towards robotics and automation, from the machine design into aspects of remote sensing, which became particularly important for precision farming, from the field engineering work, and into much more to do with the manipulation and improvement of products, especially perishables, as well as the typical agricultural durable crops. The slide which I show next was taken in 1964 and consists of the first 2 student intakes at Silsoe, together with the key academic staff, which did so much to help all of the students in those early days. You can see a picture in the near centre at the bottom of Peter Payne, the then principal, and to the right of him, John Kilgour, that Paul mentioned earlier. John was a major inspiration to all of the students that went through Silsoe. His very positive attitude in a can-do way. Who could not love a guy that built his own steam engine? Next to him on the right is Gordon Spohr, never happier than when he has a hole in front of him in the soil, and looking at the properties, giving the best advice to students and customers alike. Other key people at Silsoe in those early days was Frank Innes, to the left of Peter Payne, who was the senior tutor. I think it was Alan Rees at Newcastle who said to Peter Payne, if you want to get a good academic standard at Silsoe, appoint Frank Innes as your senior tutor. And Frank was there to set the style in terms of academic credibility for the work. Next to him, John Neville. John was a great aspiration in terms of mechanisation planning. He was one of the first people to go off on an overseas trip, and upon his retirement from Silsoe, after which he'd spent many years as academic registrar, he also became the secretary of the institution for some time. And on the far left, Professor Brian May, who took over from Peter Payne as principal in the mid-70s, Brian also going on to be president of the institution. Those first 2 or 3 years of graduating students met last year in a reunion, and as part of that they provided their CVs. This is just a glimpse of what those students achieved in their careers, from working in ADAS mechanisation in Silsoe to working with Ford tractors, later New Holland, with Class dealerships, with John Deere dealerships, with the Canadian Department of Environment and the World Bank. Those group of students went out, as did many of those that followed, to really fulfil the aspirations of the founding fathers. When that group met a year ago, they expressed their gratitude to Peter Payne and his staff for everything that they had benefited from in their 3-year experience at Silsoe. They went on to say that Silsoe is held in high regard by us all, and it speaks for itself that we are coming together after 50 years to reflect upon our time there. Silsoe equipped us well to face the future and the wide and varied career paths that followed. They put that in a letter and signed it, gave it to Peter Payne. Colin Meadows-Smith took it down to him in Falmouth and presented it more latterly last year. So how do we summarise the academic achievements of the NCAE? Well, I think its peak achievements can be thought of in sort of 5 lines. Firstly, by the middle 90s, we had grown to be 150 students a year. We serviced students from more than 70 countries in any one year. Every time a student came from a new country, a flag was raised on the dining hall wall. You can see one there. And by the time of closure at Silsoe, over 140 flags were flying. So we'd had a huge impact. That's about 2/3 of the countries in the world at the time. We raised our PhD student numbers to over 100 in a particular year, and more latterly we learned that we were graduating more postgraduate students in agricultural disciplines in 2005 than in any other UK university. A wonderful set of goals had been achieved to help the UK and the world develop in agricultural engineering. Talking about our international activities, it was not just the academic staff that linked to the rest of the world, but a group known as SAFAD, the Student Aid for Agricultural Development, was formed, where undergraduate and some postgraduate students, if they had time, would go on overseas missions during the long vacation to do good development work wherever they thought it was appropriate. The first one of those was actually with John Neville in Iran in 1968, and the slide showed there was actually John Neville had gone over for a 2-year assignment on mechanized irrigation farming near Karaj in Iran, and the picture shows he and his family just about to depart back to Ampthill after their 2-year period of study there. Iran followed on, as many other countries did. The slide to the lower right showed the soil tank in Karaj that my colleagues and I designed in Silsoe in the early 2000s, and we've also supplied them much instrumentation to enable them to continue their work. So we enabled in many ways other parts of the world to develop from the inspirational work that was being done back in the UK. Interestingly, the next slide shows the work for the development of a load car, which was to go to India, again providing equipment and resource for other parts of the world to learn from our experience by the provision of very specialist equipment. John Kilgour, that we mentioned earlier, is in the doorway of the load car. The load car followed some of the design work from the work that Paul mentioned a few slides back. And here you can see some other NIAE technicians working with John on that. The difference in this load car to the others was it had to perform in India, and so it was a hot climate version. And I can remember John Kilgour insulating one of our buildings and finding every piece of energy he could to pump into it to get the temperatures up to those of India at the time. So it was a very stimulating piece of work. We mustn't forget also the work in soil and water and post-harvest technology from soil management and drainage that Gordon led, soil erosion and conservation from Norman Hudson and Roy Morgan, Jane Rickson, irrigation and water supplies, that of Mike Carr and Melvin Kay, to the work that was done by Brian Stenning, Brian Clark, Paul Douglas, Keith Thompson in post-harvest technology. The work in both soil and water and post-harvest was acknowledged by FAO and the World Bank. Here you can see a part of a foreword by the director of FAO from the Land and Water Division, and also comments by Oscar Honish, who was from the World Bank, having spent some time in Greater Silsoe, because he came to Silsoe because of the Institute and the college and the work of ADAS. We mustn't forget that on the Silsoe College side of the road, we were joined in the middle 80s by what was originally the Soil Survey of England and Wales, which became the Soil Survey and Land Research Centre. They came at a time of great change, and effectively the practical soil surveying in the field was drawn to a halt, and so they had to find other ways of developing their techniques, and effectively it was that transfer from the old form of analogue to what I call digital soil mapping, and that made a tremendous contribution to the way that we look at soils data from then on.